So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about the editor. Specifically, we're going to talk advanced editor usage. So my general assumption is everyone coming into this webinar has at least a glancing familiarity with the editor, whether you've used it for creating your templates, for donation acknowledgements, for newsletters, maybe you used one of the slightly more basic ones for sending out a basic email, or even in events. So those are when you're doing your event details, your newsletters, and your donation acknowledgement templates. This is the editor we're talking about. So for most of this, I'll probably be going back and forth between newsletters and donation acknowledgement templates. So we're kind of going back and forth. The editor will basically be the same. So I'm actually going to go ahead and start in the newsletter template, newsletter editor. Like I said, they're basically the same. So. And let's pull up a newsletter. So let's create a new newsletter. And we're going to start with just a blank newsletter, nothing too fancy. And we're going to start by talking about some of the pre-built capabilities of the editor. So we're going to go through just about every single item in this toolbar. And then we're going to talk about some advanced concepts. So actually kind of putting bits and pieces of it together, images and links, and how we can do things like make buttons and anchors and tables and how tables can be used, stuff like that. So some more advanced elements. And then we're going to talk about HTML. So HTML is going to be the last thing we talk about today. So anybody who's not interested in that can go ahead and exit if you so desire. I recommend sitting in on it. It's a very powerful ability. It's okay if you don't know any HTML. I'll actually be teaching you the basics. So you're going to get a crash course in HTML today, only what you're going to need to know for using HTML in the editor. But so don't be afraid. HTML is actually pretty cool, pretty fun, and it'll help you both here and if you're ever just doing some web work or whatever on your website for your organization. We'll be teaching you some basics like links and images, working once again with tables, some layout stuff, and some styling stuff. So it'll be pretty handy. But let's start with the editor itself. So we're going to start with the modes. So we have 3 modes in the editor: design, HTML, and preview. And most of the time, unless you're going deep down, you're only really working in design. HTML, which we talk more about later, is if you're actually getting into the code of the page. And preview is just a preview of the page. Nothing too fancy there. So let's talk about design. So design is a what you see is what you get editor, WYSIWYG. What it's called. So you might see this sometimes with really basic website designing tools where you can just kind of put things where you want it and what you see is what you get. It works pretty good. It uses HTML as the background, so it is different from Word or something like that, which uses something other than HTML for its background coding. So that's one thing that'll come up a couple times in today's webinar. So let's talk about the first thing that, the first tool in here, copy paste. So a lot of times you want to copy and paste content that you've been working on. And so for that, we have, good old copy and paste. And you can always use key command. So you can go Control C for copy and Control V for paste. On a Mac, it might be Apple or Option. I can't remember. It might also be Control. So, for example, I could, let's pull up a Word doc. Let's get a new Word doc here. And so we can paste from Word. We may have some content in Word. And so, give me one second. Create. Okay. There. Now we have some content. So, when we're in Word, we can copy and paste. So, copy, good old-fashioned copy, and then we can either use the paste or we can use the paste from Word option. Now, I recommend using the paste from Word option always when coming from Word. Word does, like I said, a lot of weird things behind the scenes. So what I recommend is using the paste from Word. If you do just do a Control V, it will probably ask you if you want to use the paste from Word option. So that's okay. You can do it that way and it'll tidy it up. The other option would have been to use paste from Word, and it makes a little bit of a dialog. Then we just use Control V to pop it in there and paste. They'll do the same thing. So Control V, say OK, or use the specific paste from Word. if you're pasting from an online source, like another website, there's no paste from Word because it should be already in HTML, but once again, you may have some problems there. And we'll talk more about how to solve problems from pasting a little bit later when we talk about the format stripper. So copy and paste. If you're coming from like a text document, .txt, you probably won't need to do any paste from Word stuff. But if you're coming from Word, OpenOffice, any of those kind of actual formatting, word processors, then you're going to want to use the paste from Word. So even with the paste from Word, though, we still, well, actually no, this one did a pretty good job. So it cleans it up nicely. If we hadn't used the cleanup, I'll show you what the code would look like. So we're going to say cancel, and it kind of looks a little bit more garbly-gooky. We have weird class stuff in there. This one's actually not too bad example. An O tag, which I don't even know what that does. So with a more advanced page, which had maybe more formatting, indenting, we would have probably seen it even worse than that. So I was actually hoping for something worse. But so placed as plain text, paste from Word, same idea. Plain text, same idea as paste from Word, helps you clean it up. Paste as HTML will actually try to convert the formatting from Word formatting into HTML. So that's another option if you want to try and maintain the formatting. I generally recommend paste it in plain if you have to do pasting at all, and then use the rest of the options, which we haven't covered yet, to actually do your formatting. So, even though I've just showed you how to copy and paste, I really recommend, if you can, type your content directly into the editor. It will save you a lot of hassle. Okay, so that's copy and paste in a nutshell. There's also undo and redo. These are familiar. And then we come next to the image manager. So image manager is how we put images in. Pretty cool, pretty basic. So we just click on image manager. Excuse me. We will select from an existing image, or we can upload one. I'm just going to go ahead and insert a logo and insert. So now we have a logo. And we have a couple of things we can do with images once they're inserted. So I can click on it, and I can then, and I will get some editing down here, which I'll talk about, or I can right-click on it and go to Properties. And this lets us resize and do various other things. Resize is probably the most common one you'll do. What's recommended when you're resizing is to lock the width to the height. So this way, if I change the width, it will calculate what the height should be for me, thus maintaining aspect ratio. If you don't do this, you can get kind of weird stretching. So I'll kind of show you that. So let's take this to 300. Oh, that's 3,000. 300 without fixing our height. Notice that it looks kind of stretched. So if you ever get this stretching, what I would do is, what you'd probably have to do is remove the image, put it back in. They're not always guaranteed. If you know what the dimensions were, you can fix it. And then lock the ratio, and then you can resize. So aspect ratio is maintained, although I'm a little bit more zoomed in. If you zoom in too far, you do have the risk of pixelating the image. And so what that makes, basically pixelation is when things start looking blocky. So instead of having nice rounded curves, notice that the P has a bit of a line actually, because there is no curves on a computer. There's only lines. But we can trick ourselves by making, stepped lines that kind of look like curves. Anyway, so it's usually better to start with a bigger image and go smaller than a small image and go big. So if you go from a big image and go smaller, it'll look okay. You won't have any pixelation, but if you go from small to big, you will pixelate. So kind of a warning there about working with images. One other thing I like to warn about images is keep your file sizes down. So file size is an important concept with images because, and not to be confused with your dimensions. So when I say size, I'm usually talking about file size, but I'll usually, we at Support will usually try to distinguish between file size and image size. So file size is how big is it on the computer. And so a bit of a crash course in computer science, the two units you want to be interested in are kilobytes and megabytes. If you hit gigabytes, you're way, way too big, and I don't think that's even possible. A kilobyte, a megabyte is 1,024 kilobytes. And a megabyte is a pretty big piece of information when it comes to the internet. Now, on your computer, you probably have gigs of information stored, and a gig is 1024 megabytes, noticing a trend. And so to kind of give you a sense of what a megabyte is, those old floppy drives, the 3.5-inch floppies we had like 10, 20 years ago, that is 1.44 megabytes. When you were on a dial-up connection back in the day, if you were like I was, then you were running at 56 kilobytes per second. So you could move 56 kilobytes in a second. So kind of do the math on that, and we're talking minutes to move a megabyte file. So to kind of give you a sense of what file sizes you want, if you want to make sure that people who are out there, maybe out in the countryside, still working on dial-up, can see your newsletters and your images on your website, keep it as small as you can. Under 500 kilobytes would be my recommendation. Most of the time what you get from a digital camera will be in the range of like 2 to 5 megabytes. So if you can, open it up inside an image editor and resave it smaller. If you have anybody who's good at graphics at your organization, they usually can help you out. MS Paint, if you're on Windows, GIMP, GNU Image Manipulation Program is a good free program if you want something a bit more like, what's it called? Photoshop, and I don't believe Mac comes inherently with a basic image manipulation program, but there's plenty of them out there for free. You don't need anything fancy like Photoshop or GIMP, just something like MS Paint. So, so coming back, your image size, file size should be kept small, and your dimensions, it's best to go from going from big to small, then small to big. Okay, okay, so that's images. We can do a couple other fun things with images. We can work with alignments and border widths and alternative text. Alternative text is, you may have noticed this sometimes when you mouse over an image, you'll see some text. Like sometimes if you go to google.com, you mouse over their doodle and it'll say the 180th birthday of Nikolai Tesla, which I think that was the other day. Maybe it was only the 100th. Anyway, so that's alt text, the alternative text. This is used specifically for text-based browsers. You don't see those much anymore. But if your image ever loads to fail, the alt text will be shown. And then we also have image alignment and some margin, which we're not going to worry too much about right now. But image alignment tells the image where should you be on the page, left, right, center. Right now we are left aligned. This is a default. So everything always left aligns by default in HTML. So thus in our editor, everything defaults to left align. We can modify that by either clicking on properties, or we can actually use the properties down here. So these properties are for the page element, which is an image, which we'll talk more about later. So if we want to manipulate the properties or the attributes of this image, we can do so here or by using right-click properties. So if we wanted to right align or left align, we can do that. So left align. It's the same as if we had done properties left align. And that's not to be confused with these alignments. So use these ones for text. We'll talk more about alignment stuff later, but these are specifically for manipulating text, which is inside of a span, which again, a bit of HTML that we'll talk about later. But when you want to manipulate the image itself, use this alignment or the properties one. And this is going to be important later when we try to word wrap image text around an image. So we're going to actually do that later. So that's pretty fun. Okay, so we talked about maintaining aspect ratio, properties. Okay, let's talk about our next option, the document manager. This is basically going to upload a document to the NPE server for your database and give you a link to that file. So we highlight something, click on Image Manager, Document Manager, select our document, and insert. And so what it makes is a link. So if we went into preview mode, we can click on this link, and that'll go to a file. So you would probably do something like, for the latest newsletter, click here, or something like that, or for a physical copy of the newsletter, or for more information, and and to download the application file, click here, and here you would highlight and use the document manager. So this is an alternative to using attached document. So once again, what this is where this comes into play is file sizes. A lot of times PDFs, which is a good format out there, by the way, is going to be kind of sizable. It can be small, but if you have a lot of images in it, it's going to get sizable. So if it's more than maybe half a meg, so more than 500 kilobytes or more than a meg at the very most, I don't usually like pushing beyond that. Instead of attaching it, thus sending out all these 1 meg files or so, you can use the file manager and they can download it as needed. So this instead of putting all the pressure and all the work on the email system, which wasn't built for moving large files, it puts it on the on a web server, which is built for storing and moving large files using FTP, file transfer protocol. So I would recommend for anything over half a megabyte, over 500 kilobytes, to use this option. So this is good for if you've got a physical copy of your newsletter so people can download it, a rather large application form or brochures, things like that. So you can do that with your newsletters. You probably wouldn't use it so much with your templates. So some of this won't apply to templates, more to newsletters, but will be applicable. Okay, so that is the document manager. Next, we have the hyperlink manager, also known as the link manager. So hyperlink, link, same idea. What you do here, once again, we highlight the text that we want to be a link. So this is a link. So we can highlight the word link, and we click on the hyperlink manager. And we put on our URL, www.nonprofiteasy.com. If you have the HTTPS information or HTTP information, probably ought to put it in there. Some browsers get a little bit more sluggish when they have to deduce it, but it's not required. A couple other things we can do is the text. So we could have typed the text in here and then inserted it. So this is whatever I highlighted. Target. So this is a kind of a funny feature of links, and I'll show you how to do it manually later. This tells us where does the link open. By default, it will be the same window. So if you set nothing, it's the same window. But if you want it to open in another window, then you would use new window. And this is probably the one that you'd want. The other ones, but the frame and the pane and the other stuff like that, those aren't really used anymore. They're kind of depreciated. Usually it's either same window or new window. Excuse me, getting the hiccups. So I like new window because it leaves them on your web page. They leave them inside their email client, wherever they are, and opens a new tab or new browser window, depending on their browser, which they can then explore and then close when they're done. But then when they're done, they still have your document, your original document open. So this has the advantage that when they're done, they can come right back and they don't have to go looking for your email or looking for what web page they're on. So if you want to take them somewhere else and kind of where they were can go away, go ahead and leave it as none or same window. If you want to kind of make sure that they can come back to where they were because maybe they're exploring options from like maybe on a page or something, then you want new window. So let's use new window. We're going to talk about anchors in a second, actually a little bit later. And tooltip is if they mouse over it, do they get like a little tip? And so if it's an email instead, so basically if they click on the link and it should open up their email client and automatically create an email with your email address already put in, that's where you use email. So you put the email address, the link, and you can even set what the subject of that email would be. So like to apply for this application, click here. And it would open up their email client, put in your email, put in the subject that you specified, and then they can put in whatever the body text is. This is kind of, it's cool. I think it's pretty cool. I've never used it myself in my day-to-day life. Whenever I click on one of those links, I always just end up copying and pasting the email address into my own client because I don't always, a lot of times, I don't have my email and my browser linked together. My Outlook and my browser don't know how to talk to each other. So sometimes people have an integrated suite, browser and email client. Mozilla has a pretty decent one, Thunderbird, linked in with Firefox. So Firefox would open up Thunderbird, for example. So, and that's not always going to do what you want. Mobile devices, though, you're usually pretty good to go. So that's the email. Like I said, we'll talk about anchors later. So let me hit OK, and we get our link. So now if I went into preview mode, clicked on link, it would take me to the web page I designated in a new browser window. Okay, what's next? What do we got next? Is the remove link, break link. So basically what this does is we select a link and we remove it. And then we could build that link into something different. Normally, you'd probably just either delete the text, but sometimes when you delete text, it actually leaves behind the link, just linked to nothing. So it's basically, when we talk about tags, we'll see what I'm talking about later, but basically we have a link tag, start and end with nothing in between. That is our link. So I usually like using break links just to keep things tidy, but you could have always just selected the whole paragraph or something and deleted it, and that would clean it up too. Okay, so that's break link. Next, we start getting into more formatting things. So superscript and subscript. These are kind of weird. You don't probably use these two options. So superscript, let's select a bit, brings it up. So normally you'll see this used for like things like the third or fourth or fifth or things like that will sometimes be slightly up and will be, like we could do ND and then superscript the ND. So that's how you do things like that. Subscript is the other idea, and it puts it down a little bit. You use that normally for footnotes. So if you say something like, guaranteed to have a good time, and next to the word guaranteed, you have a little 1, you subscript it, and then you put it in, guarantee is not guaranteed. It's for, footnotes kind of thing. You'll see them in books sometimes. Once again, don't see it too often, but you may use your subscript to do things like second, like that. Up to you. I think actually you'd probably do that a little differently. You might even use a symbol for it, but I wouldn't guarantee it. Next is new paragraph. This is equivalent to going enter, new paragraph. But if you want to manually do it, new paragraph. There's actually a fun trick here. We'll talk more about it later. There's a difference between paragraphs and new lines in HTML. So paragraph is actually a tag. New line is also a tag, but it doesn't have as much baggage to it. It's simpler. So notice how sometimes with a new paragraph, you'll get extra space in between the two texts. New line will not give you that. So for example, let me see here. Can I forward? Okay, so for example, after the image, I'm going to remove the image. So normally so notice that between this text and this text, there's a little bit of extra space. This is because they're two separate paragraphs. So to avoid this, we can just do Shift Enter, and that gets us a new line or break. While Enter will sometimes get us a new paragraph. Oh, maybe we fix that. But this would give us a new paragraph. Okay, so actually we fixed that. So Enter is now the same as doing Shift Enter. But new paragraph is a new paragraph. So if you actually want a space between the two paragraphs, you're going to use new paragraph. Next we have insert date. That just inserts the current date. I'm not entirely certain what the point of that is. So, but it's there. Let me tidy this up. Delete, enter, okay. Okay, so what comes next? So next we have good old formatting. The stuff that you're inclined to do in Word, but probably ought not to. So this is how we mess with fonts colors, bolding, things like that. So for example, what font family do we wish to use? Right now it's defaulting to New Times Roman. So we might say, well, we don't like New Times Roman. We might want Georgia. We highlight all, click on Georgia. Or we might want Veranda. We get Veranda. So just highlight whatever you want, select your font. One thing to note about fonts, a lot of times people are like, well, I want this font or I want that font. No one else may have that font. Fonts are installed on a computer as files. And now there are a handful of fonts that are generic. They're in every computer. Some form of them exists on every computer. They're a standard. Every browser can support. And that's these. Other fonts like Comic Sans and Wingdings and Symbol and all those funny ones you find in Word. I think there's even a Pink Floyd one out there I found when I was in high school I thought was pretty cool. Don't exist on any other computers but yours, possibly. So these are it. The question was, are we going to add any more fonts? Well, these are the only ones we can add because these are the only ones that are considered standard for both HTML and web and all that. So these are the only ones that can be supported on other computers. So if I set it to a different font, I can't guarantee that that font exists on the other person's computer, and so it would just default to Times New Roman or whatever their system default was. So we can't. So there's almost no point to adding other fonts. A lot of Windows has just all these other fonts that it installs. I mean, not Windows, Word. But if someone doesn't have Word, like I don't have Word at home, I wouldn't be able to use that font. Yeah. So I would stick. So these are the fonts that are safe to use. Next, we have font size. So most people are used to using Word or OpenOffice or a similar program where fonts are measured in points. A point is 1/72 of an inch. Kind of weird measurement, but there it is. It has no, from a human perspective, we understand inches, unless you're using metric. Then you understand centimeters, but same idea. But computers don't know inches. They knew what's called pixels. A pixel, think of it this way. If you take a pencil, make it really sharp, and just dot the paper, just the finest dot you can possibly make, that is a pixel. It is one tiny piece of information. It's the smallest image you can possibly make, 1 pixel. Your monitor has a number of pixels in height and width. And so your monitor, your browser, your graphics card understands pixels as a unit of measurement. My screen right now is something like 2,000 by 1,000 pixels wide and high. So what I'm recording is, I think 975 wide and 700 tall is the area of my screen that I record. So these are finite sizes. So that's the size that HTML and everything web-based uses. So when you email something to someone, it is measured in pixels. And a pixel is not necessarily an inch, so it gets a little tricky. Generally speaking, though, 16 pixels is about 12 points in font. Not guaranteed. Monitor resolution will modify this. But your average modern monitor is somewhere at least 700 by 900 pixels. Not guaranteed. Nonprofit Easy actually recommends something in the 1200 and above range. So that's why sometimes you have to adjust your zoom. So 16 points is a pretty good size. So this is 16 right here. It's about a 12 point. Might be a little bit bigger. You could probably push it down to a 14 point. But anything between 12 and 14 pixels is about what you would be used to in terms of points in fonts in Word. So that's fonts. What else can we do? We can adjust color. So colors comes next. And yes, I know in my outline I spell it the British way. I don't know where I picked it up. So if I want to change this to a different color, then I can select all and use the foreground color. So the foreground color is the color of the font. Foreground color is red. Now it's red. I usually recommend pick one color for your entire document and stick with it. Headers might be in a different color. So if you have header sections for your sections, you might pick a different color, and that's fine. But try not to have too many colors. It might even be best to match your colors to your website for consistency. So kind of my simpler is better. Both this is from an aesthetic standpoint and from a technical standpoint. If you start going like, I want it red, except for this word here, this letter here, which will be beige. Yeah, it goes beige, but it does weird things for the HTML. So if you delete this later and then start typing, it's still beige because the code is still there. So try to keep it simple. I could just override it and set it back to the red. I don't remember what red I picked. That was not it, but close enough. That kind of works. Or you can always select a whole section and redo its color. So now it's all the same. But keep it simple. It'll prevent problems with formatting, and it's going to make it look more professional. Some of the best newsletters I've seen were very donation acknowledgments were very simple, and I've seen some that were very fancy, but I always felt like it was overwhelming my eye. But I also admit I like simple, so it's up to you what you want to do. But um, keep that in mind. That a lot of times what I was taught back in school when I did some graphics design classes was keep it simple, don't overwhelm the audience. Okay, so that's foreground color. What about background color? Well, in this case, we have background color, but this is only the background of the text. We're going to talk about how to do background color for like a whole section later on, so when we talk about tables. So background color for text is more like highlight. So if I want to highlight this yellow, I can do that. I generally recommend against this for aesthetic purposes, but nothing technically against it. But if you ever need to highlight something here or there, use it sparingly, but you'll use your background color. All right. Next, we have the format stripper. This is probably one of the most handy tools for preventing problems. So if your format just gets completely out of whack, we can go select all, or select whatever we want to select, format stripper, all formatting. All formatting is now stripped from the section I selected. One thing to warn about that, though, is it also takes out new lines. So for example, if I select these two lines and use the all option, the line break is removed because that's considered formatting. So for that purpose, sometimes it's better to just use a series of the other ones. And we're going to talk more about these elements later, but this is usually you'd use, if it's come from Word, I would use a collection of all these. Just use them one after the other, and it should strip it down pretty nicely. And if you really need to go all the way down and strip everything from it, then there is still the all, but you're going to have to add your new lines, your breaks back in. Generally speaking, though, you should be okay with just the paste from Word, but you may want to clean it up even further. Or if you've just formatted something too many times on too many versions, and things get starting to act weird, just strip it down and start over. Kind of like when if you do any woodworking and you've put too many coats of paint on something, you might strip it down with some sandpaper and put a new coat on. Instead of paint, you might put a varnish or something. Anyway, okay, so that's the format stripper. Good way to get yourself out of a corner. Next, we have markup, and that's bold, italic, underline, strike through. Once again, you highlight what you want to mark up and pick it. Bold, underline, italicized, strike through. That's everything in one. So most people tend to use bold and not the others, or italicized. Sometimes underline, but I don't see a lot of strike through. So that's that. Next is text alignment. So now so this is specifically for aligning text. So for example, I could align center, or align right, or justify. Doesn't do the greatest job justifying, or justify, or remove alignment, which is not doing anything. I'm gonna have to look into that. So most people will be using left align, but sometimes in the headers of sections you may have like your address right aligned, or the date right aligned. So that's how you can do that. Okay. Next to that is indenting. So once again, select all, and to indent right, we use the first one, indent, and we indent it right. To remove the indentation, we outdent, which puts it back left. Cool. Next is lists. So let's see, get a little. Okay. And so what you can do if you make a list, we have two options. We have what's called an ordered list, which is a numbered list, or we have an unordered list or bullet list. So we can click it, makes it an order list, or we can make it a bulleted list. Sometimes this doesn't work so well in events. I don't know why, so just a warning on that one. But it's pretty handy. All right, what do we got next? Next is show hide borders. We'll talk about borders later, but this lets you show or hide them. So if you have borders that are clear, you'll know where they are, but we'll talk more about that later. Insert symbol is for inserting funny symbols that belong to all font sets. Things like the euro sign, the what's it called? Copyright symbol. So this actually is a case where you might have like non-profit easy, and then you might superscript it or subscript it. I think it's usually superscripted. So that's a case where you might use superscript. And then for that, you might also make it a smaller font as top of it all. So you can kind of mix and match that way. So that's insert symbol. Next is insert table. Tables are handy. So tables are your key to layout. Tables are how you make columns. Tables are how you kind of put things in weird places on a page. So I'm going to show you later how to actually do tables via HTML, which is usually what I do. So whenever you ask us here at support to do something with layout, we go to the HTML and we work with tables. But if you want a more friendly way, or at least just a way to get this basic structure right, you can start by insert table, and then just like in Word, how many columns? So maybe it's a 2-column with 5 rows, so 5 by 2, or what have you. And there's also a table wizard, but I don't use that too often. And so that inserts a table. And these are those borders I talked about. And so you can, header 1, header 2. I just hit tab to do that, by the way. And then, whatever you want to put in them. And a fun fact, just like images, the table cells have the formatting ability. So we are in a table cell, TD, which we'll talk about later, and we can say, okay, in this particular cell though, we want to align right, or we want a border color of red. So you can see there's a little bit of a red, and a border width of a couple of pixels, and a background of that horrible orange color. Actually, I kind of like it, but it's kind of a goldenrod. And other things, or we can actually go into the cell properties, and that gives us a dialog. But I tend to do it here. Anything further, we'd probably go to HTML4. But like I said, just like the images, which is gone, is when we're clicked inside of a cell in a table, we can manipulate that cell here, and then we can manipulate the text the same way we did before. So I could make this some yellow color. That'll hurt your eyes. Actually, that is hurting my eyes. So let's go and do green. That's even worse. There we go. So there's 2 elements here that we're playing with: the table cell and the font. And so we're treating them differently in the editor, and sometimes that's important to distinguish. Okay, so that's can I indent going back to indent, I was asked, can you indent just the first line of a paragraph? I think you can. I have to admit, I actually don't remember how to do that. I think that's something I'd have to do from HTML, or just a couple of spaces would do it too. I know it's not pretty. I think, let's see, should I Shift Tab? Or Shift Tab, there you go. That's what you probably want. Hold down the Shift key and hit Tab. And that will give you an indent that's just for that one line. So if I keep typing, now I've only indented the first line. So Shift Tab is how you can indent the first line. Because if you hit Tab, it'll take you somewhere else. So Shift Tab is our key to indenting the first line. Okay, tables. Image maps are our next thing we talk about. And that's this. Image maps are old technology. They're cool technology, but they're older. So what an image map is, so let's put an image back in here. Let's put our logo back. An image map says somewhere in this image there is a link. This link, if you click on this part of this image, will go somewhere else. You don't see this too much anymore online, but it still exists. The technology is still there. So for example, I can right click and do the image map editor, or I can click on the image map editor there, and it brings this up. So I choose my image and I create a new area, and I'm saying that right here, dead center, is an area that if clicked on will go to nonprofiteasy.com. And put alt text and target, all that target stuff again, new window. Okay. So now, if I go to preview, when I mouse over the image, it does nothing. But notice how when I mouse to the center, I can click on it. So what it's basically doing is it's taking your image and superimposing a link on a small section of it. So the times when you might use this are if instead of building your formatting all into here, you made your newsletter or email or whatever just be an image and you just put the image in. I've seen people do that. It's actually a really good option. They'll just do the flyer for their event and just put the flyer for the event in and not even bother trying to mark it up here. They'll mark it up into something that maybe they like a little bit better. Save it as a JPEG or a PDF or a PNG, not PDF, excuse me, PNG or a JPEG, maybe even a GIF, and just put it right into the newsletter or right into the event page. And then there might be like a link listed in the image, and then they'll do image map over it. And you can have multiple images in image maps in an image. It's a pretty cool feature. Not a lot of people use it anymore because most people don't know about it. Sometimes if you go to a website and you see like a banner across the top, and you can click on certain parts of the banner, that might be an image map, or it could be multiple different images put together in a table. So once again, there's tables again. It depends on what they did. I think a lot of people nowadays just use tables. So like I said, it's an older piece of technology, but it's still pretty cool. So that's image maps. All right. And the last thing is we've already talked about it a little bit is when we're in design, what's called element details. That's what I call it. That's this section down here. So if you want to edit an element, such as what's it called? A cell or an image, you can click on it and use the element properties down here instead of right-clicking. So we've already talked a little bit about that, but that's if you ever hear me talk about element properties, for lack of a better word, that's what I'm talking about. Okie dokie. So that's all. Oh, and there's one last thing. I can't miss it. Full screen. Some of you might find the editor a little cramped. Full screen is your best friend, and that's F11 on your keyboard. So if you need a little bit more space for editing, F11 or click on the toggle image, toggle full screen. Really handy so that you can see more of what you're working on. Now this is going to come off off my recording, but it's full screen. Okay. So any questions about the buttons? We're going to go into some more advanced concept, kind of putting some ideas together on some cool things that you might do on any of you inside the editor. But any questions about the buttons that we've covered, just as they are? So we have a question about the toggle. Yes, I believe so. This should be available for acknowledgement letters. So when you're editing an acknowledgement letter, the toggle full screen should be available. I wanted to keep using this one, what I've already got written here for content for testing. But at the end, we'll go ahead and double check that. If it's not, I'll see if I can get it implemented. But we'll double check that. I'll double check that at the end. If it's not, I'll get that implemented. But it should be there. It should be available for all the big editors. So basically newsletters and acknowledgement templates. If it's not in templates, I'll have it added because that would probably be very handy. Okay, so let's talk about some of the more advanced things that people like to do. One of them is buttons. Some people like to make donate now buttons. So how can we do that? How can we make a button? Well, what is a button? A button is a piece of text or an image that when you click on it, it does something. Now, a true button would be using things like HTML forms. Well, we can't do that. So how can we duplicate a button? Well, we could have an image and we can have it a link, make the image a link. So what we can do is we use our image manager to put in some image. I'm pretty darn certain I don't have anything that would double as a button. So let's once again just use our logo. So here's our logo. Let's say this is not a logo and it says something like submit or donate now, or because it might be maybe that image that they use for the donate buttons for PayPal, or maybe someone at your office has made a donate now button manually. It's not too hard, that will take you to your public page, donation page, or to your WordPress donation page. So you put in your image like you normally do. And then what we do is we highlight it and we go up to Hyperlink Manager, click on that, and we put our link, www.nonprofiteasy.com. We set our target, new window, and hit OK. So now this image is effectively a button. It will take you somewhere else. So basically, it's just an image with a link, is how you can duplicate a button that will take you somewhere. So usually I see this with a Donate Now buttons that will take you to PayPal, public pages, WordPress, what have you. So that's buttons in a nutshell. But the button could take you anywhere. If you actually want the button to do something, then unfortunately that is beyond the scope of what can be done with a newsletter or donation acknowledgement that's been emailed. So really the only action we can have our button to do is take us to another link, take us to a website. If you actually want it to submit a form or something, we can't do that because we can't use form elements in a newsletter email. You can probably try. I suspect that most email clients would reject it. So, I don't believe our editor will allow those elements. I think it'll just remove them. So, buttons in a nutshell. Well, what else can we do? We can do anchors. So anchors are basically links. They're fancy links that point specifically to another part of the document we are currently in. Go to Wikipedia sometime. Pick a page, any page. And there's a table of contents at the top. And you'll notice that those are links. And when you click on that link, it takes you down the page to another part on the page. That's an anchor. So anchors are handy, mostly for newsletters. You don't see it as much with donation acknowledgements. If you've got a long newsletter and broken into sections, and you put a little table of contents at the top, so you make a table or just a list, and you make a link. So let's, first off, we have to make the anchor. I'm trying to remember how to do that. So we want to go down the page. So we're going to put an anchor at the bottom, right in between these. So we click on Hyperlink Manager, Anchor, and we add the anchor name of bottom and hit OK. So now there's an anchor down here. We can't see it. It's hidden. But if we went to the HTML, it is right here. And then if we want to actually make a link that goes to that bottom, we could have our blah, 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 header, all the whatever we want. And just like normal, we highlight, Hyperlink Manager, Anchor, select existing anchor, bottom. Okay. So now if I click on this, it will take me down the page. I didn't think it would do anything in the preview mode. But if I was actually in a proper preview, oh, here we go. I don't think it's long enough. But if you're on a web page or in a long email, it would take you down the page to where the anchor is located. So anchors are really nice for large emails, helping people navigate inside them. And my next topic is tables. So we're going to talk more about tables. Tables are the key to layout. Tables are what let you put images with a piece of text centered under it. So for example, I could put this in a table. Or let's see, let's make a new table. So I'm going to make a table. This is going to be kind of cool. So we can use table to do layout, a 1-by-1 table. And inside this table, oh wait, no, excuse me. I need a 2-by-1 table. 2-by-1 table. And in the top, I put some image. Sorry, mouse is getting squirrely. So I put some image, high def logo. Nope, that's some other organization. Let's see. And more nonprofit, green ambassadors. Where's what I got here? Sierra Leone. Nope, that's nothing. Carolina Benduelos. So that's a person. All right, it's a horse. Let's go with that. So we have a horse. And let me actually bring the font, the size down so it's a little bit more manageable. Locked, bring it down to 200. Okay, and all right, so I want a caption underneath it, horse. and I want the caption centered underneath it, center. But I want the whole table over here on the right. So tables, think of them sometimes as containers. And this concept of containers is going to come up when we talk about HTML. And a table is basically a container. And we can put stuff in the table, and then we can move things within the container, and then we can move the container around. So kind of think of like a picture. You know, you picture in a frame. We could paint the picture and put things in specific places, and then put the picture frame somewhere on our wall, so that we can have, you know, the part of the picture is, you know, in the center, but the picture frame is on the left or the right. So this lets us do funny things like that. If we had tried to put horse outside of it, the best we could do is center. We could left it, we could center it, or right align it all the way to the right, but it wouldn't be in relation relative to the image. So this lets us put things in relation to each other on a smaller scale, and then as a whole unit in relation to the whole page. So that's one of the things you can do with tables. The other, as you saw, was tables. The last you can do is you can create whole page layouts. So we could create a page layout that was a 2-column newsletter. Or we can use tables to create a top section that's a single cell, and then underneath it a body that's 2 columns. So tables are the key to layout. Tables are how you will be able to lay out the structure of a document. This is what we do when we here at Support, you know, put a layout together for you if you ever ask us to. We make a table, a fancy table, but a table nonetheless. Which brings us to some of the properties of a table. We can manipulate the size of the table. So for example, I can make this table. So I'm going to click on the tables element itself. Ooh, I went too far. What I do? Table. Why is it doing that? This is why I usually switch to HTML. T-body? Why does it keep going to the div? Where the heck am I? That's strange. Font? Well, okay, I did too many screwy things, but let's just make a new table. Okay. Sorry, if I scroll when I'm out here, it scrolls the whole page. If I scroll when I'm in here, then it actually scrolls what I want. So let's insert a new table and use that as our guinea pig. So let's go farther down the page, and let's insert a new table, 2 columns, and what we can do is, there we go, click on the table element, and we can give our table a fixed width. So we can do 650, for example. And so now our table is 650 pixels wide. And we can give it a height. So we could say it's 500. And so now it's 500 tall. So we get these nice squarish look. You usually don't want to do it that way though. So let's go back. So this would let you put, you know, content 1, content 2. So the table on the whole is 650 pixels wide. So if I go to preview, it'll look like that. So as you can see, you can do layout this way. Now, we can get even fancier. We can actually start manipulating the columns, the widths and heights of individual cells, and fun things like that. Now, if we actually want to do a cell that spans 2 columns, that's where we have to go to HTML, and I will be covering that later. But tables are your key to layout. So it's usually your first step. If you're going to be using a layout of your specification, not using one of our setup ones, and these all use tables, by the way, then you're going to probably want to make your table first and then start manipulating how it looks and then put in your content. So layout first with tables and then content. So normally for more advanced table layout stuff, though, you're going to start playing with the HTML, which we're going to do next. So let's talk about the last thing I had on my list of advanced things, and let's talk about word wrapping. How can we wrap the text around an image is commonly done. So what we can do is we can put in our text. So let's use our blah-de-blah stuff up here. Oop, too many new lines. So okay. And where we want our image. So what we normally do is you click where your text starts, right before it. Then you insert your image. Once again, let's use our logo. You insert it, and then you click on it and use the element properties, and you right align the image, or you left align the image, or you center it. Well, center, okay, center didn't do what I expected, but usually it's left or what have you. And that's how you get word wrap around an image. Center, I think you actually have to put the image in the center of the text. I can't remember. I don't use that one very often, so I don't remember it offhand. But that's how you can word wrap. So you put in your text, and then you put in your image. Or put in your image, and then put in your text. It doesn't really matter. Just put your image before, if you think of this as in a line with each other, which it is, by the way, in the HTML. Somewhere, here it is. Here's our image. Then, that's a mess. Then you're going to put the text after the image. And that's kind of what we're doing here too. This has actually also been word wrapped because I right aligned the table. So you can also word wrap around tables. So your element alignment will let you do the word wrap. So going back to table, why does it do that? I'm not sure why. So something's weird. There's a small bug there I'm gonna have to look into, but so yeah. Any questions before we actually start diving into HTML of things to be done in the editor? This is a good time for questions. Maybe there's something I haven't thought of including in the advanced kind of combo deal little section I just did. So it's a good time for questions. After questions are done, I will be switching over to HTML. So anyone who's not interested in HTML, you can go ahead and exit now. The rest of this webinar will be a crash course in HTML and common elements that would let you kind of have a little bit more power in your newsletters and donation acknowledgments. Things that can't be done with the editor, or just easier to do in HTML, or just fine tuning. So I'll give it a second. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's switch over to donation acknowledgments. So we're done with newsletters. I mean, this is going to go either way, but let's use a donation acknowledgement. So let's make a new template in donation acknowledgement just so that we have both examples. And I've made a new template, totally nice and blank. Nothing in HTML. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about HTML. You're going to get a crash course in programming. Not really programming. So I guess that's the first thing. HTML is what's called a hyper, oops. It fits in. How do I know when I start a new page? So let's answer that. Okay, yeah, I'll answer that before we go into it. So the question is, for example, in donation acknowledgement, how do I know when I start a new page, especially if you're using a footer? Unfortunately, there's no way to tell. Specifically, what you can do in donation acknowledgement, and this is a trick, is start a batch in donation acknowledgement, and then we'll start HTML. Go into donation acknowledgement and start any old batch. And in step 3, setup, you can download a PDF of a document version of it, and this will tell you if you've gone beyond a page. So unfortunately, there's no real way to know until you actually try it. Luckily, we don't have to waste any paper. I can just go download PDF and get myself a PDF, and I'll know if I went past one page. So and then you'll just fine tune from there. Yeah, I wish I could give you a better answer for that, but we won't know until we actually try to fit it on a page. Generally, speaking, a page is roughly a little over 1,000 pixels. So I don't know how much help that is, but a page is roughly 1,000 pixels tall. I can't guarantee that. Different pages will, printers and margins will do different things a little bit. So as long as you're not, your table height and all that isn't past 1,000, you're probably good to go. But you probably want to fine tune in this mode, and that's why I like this mode for fine tuning. By the way, donation acknowledgement letters. I can edit the template here. I can preview it here, and I can save my template under the same name, overwrite it, and it will apply to all later versions of this template. So this is actually a good place to do your fine tuning. But we're going to start in Manage Templates. Okay, and let's get a crash course in HTML. So HTML, I should know this, stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it's actually what's called a markup language, not to be confused with a programming or a scripting language. We computer geeks, we have all sorts of languages. We think we're linguistics people. So it's what specifically HTML was meant to do was to format text. So we're not actually running code. We're not doing operations with the CPU and the RAM and all that fun stuff. We are simply editing and formatting text. So that's what HTML does. It formats text. Now we've gotten really advanced. We're all the way on HTML5 now, and it's almost become a downright programming language. It's got so much you can do with it. But what we're really concerned about in Nonprofit Easy is some of the oldest tags in HTML, basic formatting tags. And so what a tag is, it's basically the command. It's what we're telling the system to do. So the basic structure in HTML is that you have your opening tag, and you have your closing tag. And everything affected by this tag is in between text. Not always text, but we'll ignore that for now. And so an opening tag will be bracket, the tag, and bracket, or caret, whatever it is. And then whatever's in between, then bracket, / the same tag, and then the bracket, the end bracket. So this / tells the system when it parses through the document. When it goes through and says, okay, what am I doing here? I'm organizing all this stuff. It says, here a tag starts. Okay, I'm going to keep doing and keep applying whatever this tag tells me to do until I run across this end tag. Oop. And the / is what makes it an end tag. So if I had tag, again, that's a whole nother tag. So this could be tag 2, doing something different. So it looks for the same tag, and it's going to find it basically the closing tag. And so opening, closing tags is your basic syntax. Next, within a tag, we have what's called attributes. Wait, what did I talk about? Oh, I mentioned my outline, something about indents. I'm gonna actually put that off till a bit later. Indents don't matter, but I wanted to mention why they don't matter. So let's actually, before we go into actually attributes, let's talk more about structure. So tags can be within tags, for example. So this is our tag, but I can have this tag inside another tag. So we're nesting tags within tags. So this tag will apply to the text as well as this tag. And sometimes we can, we might have this tag applying to a piece of text, and then we might have more text that it's not applying to, but this outer tag is applying to. For example, we might make this piece of text bold, while the rest of it's italicized. So starting here, we tell the system, start italicizing. Okay, start bolding. So bold this section, stop bolding. Now the rest of it's still being italicized by this tag, and then we stop italicizing. So this would look at like something like, text would be bold and italicized, and more text would simply be italicized, for example. So whatever you put inside a tag will be affected. And if you have tags within that tag, those tags will be doubly affected unless they do something that overrides. But okay, now I'm just getting complicated. Like I said, I might get a little convoluted. So let me know if I get too convoluted. So that's our basic structure. Start tag, end tag, they can be inside of tags. So we need a start and we need an end. And they need to be properly nested, it's the term. So for example, tag would not be followed by, so tag, okay, would be followed by tag 2, okay, nested inside of each other. But we wouldn't then end the first tag and then end the second tag. That's what's called unformedness. It's not well formed. This will throw an error probably. It wouldn't actually work. It might even just get deleted. So everything, what's on the outside has to stay on the outside. So think of it like those little Russian dolls where you have one inside another inside another. They're always one inside the other. So a tag that you start must always end inside whatever tag it's inside. It can't end outside of it. So there's no leaks here. You know, we can't have a Russian doll that we sawed partially through and then kind of fit them together like a jigsaw. No, they fit wholly and completely inside of each other. So I don't know if that kind of helps. It's not like Lincoln Logs where they start interlinking. So, okay. So closing our tags properly, closed within its, within itself, within whatever is holding it, is called well-formedness. You might sometimes see. Sometimes you'll see it written out with indents. And this is purely for to help kind of make life sane. So you might see it written out. Okay, like this. To kind of help, oh bugger. Sorry, I keep hitting tab instead of space. Okay, so you might sometimes see HTML written out like this. So this is a good way to structurally see it. So this can get a little messy, but this is a way we can kind of visually see what's going on, what's inside of what. So this tag is inside of this tag. Thank you. And so, no, okay. So that's kind of the structure of HTML. And so indents are really just used for visual help. It's not really a structural element. Okay, so next, within a tag, so a tag is what we do. Inside of a tag, we have what's called attributes. And an attribute tells us how to do it. So a tag might be create a table. The tag is table. And the attribute might be width, telling us how we do the tag, how we do the table. We're going to do it with a certain width. So our attribute will usually be something like attribute equals some value. Sorry, Steve, Glenn, I had to mute you, I didn't know the background. So our attribute will usually have a value that goes with it. So the attribute says so the tag says what we do. The attribute says how we do it, and the value is specifically how we're doing it. So you're going to have attribute value pairs. Okay. And sometimes within a value, it'll actually be written out as a property of that attribute with then the value. And we're going to talk about that when we do styling. Okay, so that's our basic structure. Tag, attribute within the tag, so it's within the brackets, so it's part of the tag, and then an end tag somewhere else. Okay, I gave in the outline a link to a site called w3schools.com that will give you a list of all the possible HTML tags. You will probably not use most of those. There's a lot on there. So we're going to run through some of the basic tags that you're going to actually be interested in. And the first one is how to make a link. And I know this seems strange, but that tag is actually the A tag. So A tag is how you make a link. Well, okay, just saying it's a link doesn't do us any good. So we have an attribute called href, which is hyperlink reference. with the value of your URL. So ahref equals URL. So something like www.nonprofiteasy.com. And what this will do is it will create a link. I'm actually surprised it kept all my tag stuff. So let me delete all that. So ahref, A is, I should figure what A stands for something. I can't remember what it was, but A is link. I know it's counterintuitive, but ahref equals, and then your link. So another attribute that comes with links is target. Target tells us where do we open it. So our two main targets are same window or blank, which is new. This is some really old code. It hasn't changed ever. So if we want to tell it where we want it to open, we can go target equals, and then we tell it where. So we put it in quotation marks. Blank will open it in a new window or tab. This is probably what you want to use. None I believe opens it in the same. It's the default of the browser, which is usually same. Same, don't quote me on if that's actually the attribute value, is same. Normally you'd leave this blank unless you specifically want to tell the browser to open it in something new, in which case target equals blank. A is our tag, href is our attribute with the value w of nonprofiteasy.com. Target is another attribute with the value of blank. And then we have our stuff and our end tag. So that's links. So if you ever need to manually make a link anywhere, that's how you do it. Normally you can use the hyperlink manager, so you don't need to. Another useful one, let's leave that in there, is break. Break is new line, and we do that by br / and then end. So you might be wondering, well, where's your end tag? And this is a funny one, in that way that computer scientists think things are funny, is this is actually our end tag built into the tag. So officially this is the same as seeing this, but you never have anything in between here, ever. There's no point. It would get deleted, I think, if you even tried. So they made a shorthand for it of this. So this is new line. This is go to the next line. So in design, that would drop me down 1. Why did it? No, did I do that wrong? Where is it? This. Why is it not? What? I'm just having a day, right, all of a sudden. Anywho, that is how you do it. I'm not sure why I'm suddenly having trouble. Oh, it's probably because it's the end of document. So, there we go. It was because it was the end of document. So, break, new line, carriage return, enter, all those fun things. Okay, next is, let's put another new line in here, image. How do we insert images? Well, this one's a little bit more intuitive than link. It's img. And this is just like break, ends itself. These are two of the only ones that do it. So image img is our tag, but it needs an attribute. We need to tell it where the image is located. And so our main attribute here is source. Source equals, and then the URL for the image. So at the moment, I don't have a good image to put in here. So, let's see here. Let's actually use the image manager to put it in, because I don't know an image URL offhand. Okay, so image, alt text, there was that alt field, and then our image logo. So source equals the URL. Normally you'd have HTTPS and all that on here. This is actually referring to a local files. I'm not going to cover local versus static, relative versus static linking. So, but if you're doing it by hand, you'd probably look more like this. If we did want to modify the width and height, then we'd use the attribute width equals like 100. And that would give us a width equals 100. Because we didn't specify height, it will maintain aspect ratio as best it can. So that's images in a nutshell. So let's go down a line. Let's go down 2 lines. Okay, what's next is P, the paragraph tag. This one basically says everything inside of here is a paragraph. We don't need to put a new line on this one. It is already inherent to the P tag. So if I then go down here and put more text, the break is done for me. So P is paragraph. And the attributes on this one are all is basically the style attribute, which we're going to talk about later when we talk about styling. But there's a handful of tags that we can apply style to. P is one of them. Span is another. So span is basically saying within this span of text, within this span of whatever elements, we plan to apply some attribute. So span is basically a placeholder tag. It's basically saying that we need to apply attributes to everything inside here, but we need some tag to attach the attribute to. And so span is how we do that. So we put some gobbledygook in here, and span on its own has no functionality. It does nothing, unlike P. P actually has the line break like you saw. Span has nothing. It does nothing inherently. So this is where we would start adding styling. So style equals something like font or maybe size is 12 pixels. We'll talk more about the syntax of what I just did here later. So span style equals something. So it's going to be smaller or bigger or get deleted entirely. I did something wrong. Well, that's why normally you wouldn't do that. You'd actually use the editor to put that in, so I'm not quite sure what I did. Let's see here.
So, did you get that file that I just sent you?
So here we have it. I'm not sure what happened there. Oh, I used the wrong, it's font size, not size. So normally that would have cleaned it up, but whatever. So span style font size 12. So this means that whatever I'm spanning, whatever I'm going across, will be manipulated in this way. I could also put a style tag inside of P, but like I said, we'll talk more about that later. But there's no inherent break, so no break. Tax it right on the end. Unlike P, yes, break, which will actually let it go down to the next line. Okay, so let's actually put in a break. Okay, what's next? Table. So this is the last tag of interest to you. So images, links, images, new lines, paragraph, span, and table. These are your main These are your main 5 tags for kind of structural stuff. Oh, before we go into some markup ones. So table is kind of a slightly more complicated one. This is where that nesting comes into play. So we make a table. But this is an empty table. So what we have to do is we have to make table rows using tr. So tr makes a table row. It must be nested inside of table. You may also end up with another tag that's encompassing everything called tbody. We can ignore that for now. It's required, but I'm not going to get into why it's required. So we have table rows, and then within a table row, we have table cells. Don't ask me why it's called TD, I don't remember. So this creates a 1-by-1 table with one cell within one row within the table. So here it is. So I put in that tbody for us. So it actually, I think, creates an extra cell for us automatically, the editor does. So cell 1, cell 2. Oop, helps if I cell 1, cell 2. And we can manipulate this from here. So we have a couple of attributes that are particularly handy. One of them is width. We talked about it earlier. Width equals 400. So this sets the width on the table. We can also put the width on the cells and on the rows. Now be a little careful with that. Normally I'll attach it to something like a row, and this is how I do footers, by the way. So what I would do is if I wanted a footer for a document, I'm going to put in another row, and this row is our footer. So here's this would be our body, and down here would be our footer. So what I might do is say, okay, the top row, our body, needs to be a certain height. And so our height comes into play here. Height equals something like 700 would make you a decent footer. So it pushes it all the way down. And then down here I have my footer. So that's how I do footers. But you might notice there's something weird going on here. It's because we have a mismatch. We have two cells in one row and one cell in another. So we need to tell the system that this cell should span two columns. And we do that with col span. Column span equals 2. This one cell spans two columns. So now we have two columns here. So those are probably the core to know. You have your table, you have your rows, you have your cells, and you have column spans on your cells. And you manipulate your heights to position things on the page. So your standard 8.5 by 11 page is about, I think, 740 pixels wide. And your height, like I said, is around 1,000, but you usually have a header with an image, and then you have some body text, and the footer itself takes a little page space. So your body height will probably be somewhere around 700, can't guarantee that. So this gives us a nice and wide and long document. So you would have normally done all that table work before any content. So take out that break. So normally when you start, you do something like this. You don't even have any content. You might have a little bit of placeholder content, but you wouldn't put much in there yet. And so this creates for me a unmargined, relatively wide, should fit the whole page document. If you don't worry about margins at all, you actually don't need to put a width on it. And this page will simply take as much space as the text needs, width-wise. There can be some advantages of fixing your width, because if you want anything right aligned, then you know where it's going to be. So Taylor and I, here at Support, have discovered a pretty good means by which to do width and height and doing margins. So I'm going to go ahead and steal that, because I've got it all written up here. And we'll run through, as an example, what we're doing here. So here we've built a table with a total width of 740. Now we've done something fun here. We've actually nested a table within a table. So what we did was we made a table 740 wide with one row, but the row has two cells. The left cell is 30 pixels wide, giving us a left margin. The right cell is the rest of the document. And that table takes up 100% of the space that remains. So you can use percentages, by the way. And it has a cell with a height of 850, thus pushing the content down to a footer. So that's how we created this. We have one table with one row with two cells. Our left cell is empty space as a margin. Our right cell is then a table of its own with a single cell at the top in one row, another cell that has a height specified, and then a footer, which is our third row. So that's tables, and how you can kind of use tables to build layouts. Fun stuff. All right. Well, what other fun tags do we have? Well, we've got a couple of markup ones, and these ones are really basic. Bold. How do we make things bold? With B. Start with a B, end with a B. You have bold. What's italic? I. Start with an I, end with an I. What's underline? Well, you might have guessed, it's U. These are like the oldest markup tags in all of HTML. And the last one is strike through, S. You don't see S used much anymore. It has been, I think it's actually being depreciated for something called delete, but I think it's still there. Or del, I think it's del. So these are your basic markup tags. Whenever you use the bold up, where is it? Right here, you're using the B tag. Well, you're actually using other things, but the editor does italices and underlining differently, but those tags still exist, and they use strong as opposed to bold, but they are equivalent. So strong equals bold, EM equals italicized, I forget what it means, what's EM supposed to stand for. Span style, text decoration, underline is the same as U, and S is S. But you can, for your purposes, use BI, S, and U. All right, so we've skirted around it. Style. How do we have a little style in our documents? Besides having cool clothes and a fancy hairdo, we use style tags. Now, HTML has actually replaced the old ways of doing things with what's called CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, which we are totally not covering today. But we can do what's called inline cascading style sheets, or just styling, using the style attribute. So we can go p tag, for example, or span, and we can have our text. And we might want to format it in a way. We want to give it some style. So we add the attribute style equals, and then quotation marks. And what's in our quotation marks will be basically key paired values. We have a property and a value. And so some of these properties are things like font, manipulate font, font size, alignment, line spacing, color, background color. So one of our basic ones is font family. And this is actually how you pick fonts. Kind of sounds a little strange. So font family will let you pick something like Times, Arial, Courier. You can also use it for things like serif versus sans serif. So what it'll do is it'll pick the first default in that family that the browser has. Normally you don't want to do necessarily serif or sans serif. You'd probably do something like Times New Roman, or Times or Arial or something like that. So we would do something like font dash family colon Times semicolon. And semicolon says we're done with this property pair. So we can put another pair in our style. So now we're in Times New Roman, or Times. If we want to do Times New Roman, you would have typed in Times New Roman and single quoted it. But I don't feel like risking in that one. So what else do we have? Well, let's manipulate the size of our font. So we do font dash size colon, 10 px semicolon. I put a space there, but it doesn't matter. So the 10px is 10 pixels. Font size says use fonts. Semicolon says we're done. So now it's 10 pixels. And there's a whole bunch of other ones. Alignment also exists using the text align attribute and something like right or left. So that's text alignment. Line spacing. So if you want to do line spacing other than single spaced, most commonly 1.5, you would use the styling of, where is it, line dash height colon 1.5 semicolon. So as long as I spelled height right, which I can't guarantee, this is now, so if I go and put a little bit more gibberish in here, make sure it's going to go to multiple lines. This is now, oops, 1 second. Need more text. This is where sometimes I'll copy and paste the lyrics from Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance. Okay, so now there's theoretical. Okay, let me go back up to a font that we can all read. This is now 1.5 line spacing. No, it's not, because I didn't spell height right. Excuse me. Is that right that time? That's right that time. There we go. Line height. Had to spell it right. So that's line height. That gives you line spacing. The next is color, not to be confused with the way I spell it. So our next styling is color. There's 2 ways to handle color. So we can type in color, black. It knows what the word black means. Black means black. The color black. So it understands what black means. Red is red. But aquamarine, it has no idea what that means. So it has color codes, which you can find on the link I provided, or you can just look up color, like HTML color codes. And so that's where you can get outside of black, white, red, green, and you can get into like those weird shades of like reddish blues, which is kind of a purple, but you know what I mean, or like those really dark reds or the really light reds, or what have you. So you use color codes for that. And so instead of putting color is red, instead of red, you'd put the color code. So for example, you would put something like asterisk, or hash 00000, I think it's 6, would give me white. Or is that black? Or maybe it's neither. So, but all zeros I think is like white or black. All F is the other one. I think I can never remember which one's which. I think white is 0 and black is F. It's hexadecimal, that's why it's F. We ignore that for now. So that's how you can do color. And color can be used in a myriad of places. Normally it's going to be used for font. The last one I want to talk about is specifically for tables, for table cells. So you can put it on TD, TR, or table itself. And that is border. And so with border, you actually specify multiple things at once. So you do border, it used to be inside the style attributes, border, and then you'd say, how wide is my border? 2 pixels. What do I want to make my border look like? Solid, so a solid line. Maybe I want to do it dashed, and I believe you can use dashed. You have to look that up. And last, what color is my border? Black. Black. And this would be the property value you would have put in style. Now it doesn't do anything. I don't think it does anything for me on a p tag, but that is right here. Paste. Oh, so it does. So you can even put it on a p tag, normally, or a span or anything like that, and it puts that piece of text with a border as specified. So as you can see, you can do some fun things in HTML that you couldn't normally do in the editor. I mean, you can theoretically do them in the editor, but it becomes trickier. So if you ever have problems with your newsletter, with your template, and the editor is just failing you, and it will, and you're feeling a little too stubborn to give us a call here at support, dive into the HTML. These are the tags that you're interested in. Look for the span, look for the p tag, look for the table. So the key is really to find the end tag so you know what's within something. So the older a newsletter is, the more it's been edited, the more you find empty spans, empty p tags, things like that. So sometimes you got to remove them to tidy things up. So that's more or less all I have for today's webinar. Hopefully I didn't get too esoteric for y'all. As always, feel free to shoot us an email at support. If you want a good website for learning about HTML, www.w3, the number 3, schools.com. So that's www.w3schools.com. They have tutorials on all sorts of fun stuff. And you're specifically interested in the HTML stuff, There's some other HTML that I didn't cover, such as actually how to make a web page. You don't need any of that for Nonprofit Easy, but I definitely recommend checking out that website if you want to just learn about HTML. And that's all I have. I hope everybody was able to get something useful out of this, and I will talk to you all later.